Marty. I'm not going to waste a whole bunch of time here, but I got a quick story to tell you before we get into the tech talk stuff. Hey, Jerry. Hey, Chad. So I wanted to show y'all this Pro Stock bike right here. You might have seen it on my Facebook page. This is in 1985, 86. I think this is 86. This is Greg Cope and I. He worked at Star Racing, and Jackie and I paid all the bills at Star Racing, but Greg and I traveled and raced together in the IDBA and the NHRA some. And this bike is unique because after the funny bike that we raced for all those years and won championships, the Kawasaki and Suzuki, this is our first Suzuki Pro Stocker. And it had a stock frame with Cosman drag forks, and we had a really neat little Marvick hollow magnesium wheel on the back. Pretty cool bike. But anyway, we were running 530s with it in the 8th, and now you got to go 430s with them. But hey, look, what was this? 35 years ago. It only picked up a second in the 8th mile. What was that, from 530s to 430s now? But that's a cool bike. This is one that was before John Myers' days. When John started racing Top Gas and came along, I was into this bike by then. This Pro Stock bike was my first Cosman chassis Pro Stock motorcycle. Didn't have anything stock on it but the 1150 cylinder head. And I think this particular shot, I can't really tell. Let me look. This one might be the first 2-valve. We had the first Suzuki 2-valve where we welded all the holes up and re-drilled it to fit the 4-valve head, the GS1000 head. But anyway, we were able to run with the Kawasaki's back then by putting a 2-valve head on it, and this one had the 4-valve head. And how did we learn about all these engines back then and all these motorcycles and how to go fast back then? As we got dynamometers. We had lots of dynos over the years, and I have a photo of my first dyno. This is our first Stuska dyno at Star Racing, and you had to take the tachometer times the primary ratio, and the tach's right here. And this was the torque meter, and it would just wind up there and show you the torque, and then you would have to do it times the RPM and divide it by 5252 to get the horsepower. Now this knob right here, this is the water knob. It was just like a faucet, like you would just turn it. And when we got smart, after we used it for a little while, we put a suicide knob on it where I could grab the handle like this and turn that knob as fast as I could. And then I saw later some folks got smart and put a little motor on them with a little chain drive so that they could turn an electric knob and make the water valve open. But let me tell you about this Stuska dyno, man. So much happened so fast that we had to have a video camera and 3 people to watch it. So somebody said, I saw the RPM at 6,000 times 2.11, which was made at 12,000 something. And somebody said, I saw the torque needle go to this number. So we had Jackie put a camera on a tripod and video it so we could go back and see the RPM and see the torque meter. And then we would do the math on a pad on the side, and then we would be able to figure out if the camshaft change or the timing change or the jetting change excuse me, made a difference on the power. So we were learning as slow as we could back then when we had this. Then after that, we got us the first 800-something Superflow dyno, which was like getting a NASA space shuttle. And then that wore out pretty fast, and we got us a 901 and used it for decades. And then we got us a bigger Superflow where it had 2 brakes on it, where we could put the Pro Stock car on it. So we ran the Pro Stock car stuff 92, 93, 94. At the same time, we were running the Superflow dyno with the Pro Stock motorcycle engine for John Myers. Now, one more thing about this bike. I got Kenny Williams painted this. It's got neon paint on it. When the colors look like neon lights. That was pretty cool. And this was a 4-valve. Oh, and it had cone carbs. This was before we had electrons, which was Vance and Hines took a real cool Mikuni and made a smoothbore out of it. And I think Rick Stetson may have invented that. And Rick Stetson had a bike that looked like this, and Tom McCarthy built one. He still got it. It reminds him of this. It looks like a Rick Stetson clone. But this was a cool bike. Ran good. This bike right here, I won the Chief Nationals 1987. I ran Mike Keat, Superbike Mike in the final. Went, I think, an 8:10 to win. The neat part about the 87 Chief Nationals at Texas Motorplex was Terry Vance qualified on the pole and set the record. He was the first pro stock motorcycle to go 799 at the same race. I ended up winning. That was my first pro stock win after winning a lot of races on the funny bike. And then, of course, what's cool about this bike, and I kept some of this, I got the body and some other stuff I saved, but what's cool about this bike is I won on this motorcycle in 88, and John Myers won on this bike in 89, and then we built the first GSXR. So this is the only pro stock bike that John Myers and I both rode into Winter Circle, which is very cool. And it had Goodyear tire before Benny Menz, Ford, hot rod, fast, stick shift Benny Menz invented the big tire bike on the back. He had the Mickey Thompson on there, making those things go really fast. All right, that's my history story for today, and I got plenty more of them, but I just wanted to share that with you. But a couple things that I have been thinking about is the speed limits. And engine design, speed limits are important. And I'm going to just, I kicked it. I'm going to talk off the cuff for a second. Oh, wait, I got to show you all my shark socks. Yep, God loves sharks too. Anyway, back to the speed limits. I wrote down 6,000, 6,200. That's not RPM. Those are actual piston speed limits. And that's just an opinion. Hey, Jim, Bob, Jerry, Kelly, I want to tell you about this because what you do is you take the stroke times the RPM, divide it by 6, and it gives you piston speed. And let's just use some good ones off of my handy dandy old man AARP calculator that I brought from Georgia. Let's try and see if I can get some numbers. Let's take these are opinions, okay, folks? Some of the math is no matter who you are. I mean, Warren Johnson and Bob Glidden and God bless his soul, and John Myers, late great John Myers. Yep, I should have said that earlier. I didn't, but I really miss John, and so do many of us. Thank you. I wanted to tell you about the math. Some of the math is undisputable. Like, for instance, if you have a 4-inch bore times a 4-inch bore times a 3.5 stroke times 0.7854 times how many cylinders, 8, equals, that's a 351.8 cubic inch engine. So your cubic inches are always bore times stroke times 7854 times the amount of cylinders. That's another story. But I just wanted to say some of the engine math is not my opinion. It's just math, and math matters, because if somebody tells you you can only make so much horsepower per cubic inch based on math, I'm sorry, that's wrong. What they should say is you can only make so much horsepower per cubic inch based on what has been done, or based on what they think, or based on what a simulation thinks, because a simulation has to have somebody tell it the math. And it's a spreadsheet that does the math for you. But back to the piston speed, let's just take a small block Chevy, let's just say it's a 3.5 stroke, just to do something easy. 3.5 stroke times 7,000 RPM. 3.5 stroke times 7,000 RPM divided by 6 equals 4,083 feet per minute. That's how many average feet the piston would go at 7,000 RPM with 3.5. So there's some pretty good math that's used here, and this is my personal, not the math for a simulation program, or not the math from any super expert or some engine guru, but this is my math. This is what I think horsepower starts to nose over. If you were to draw horsepower per cubic inch on a graph, no, horsepower versus piston speed on a graph, I'm sorry. When you get up to 6,000, 6,500, horsepower per feet of piston speed goes down. It's almost the same as over rev, but it's in a different way that you don't ever measure, and most of our engine guys don't measure. So what we have is we have two speed limits. We have the piston speed and the valve train speed. So when you build an engine from scratch, which I wanted to say, in my retirement, I am so thankful that I was able to spend 40 some odd years building, developing, designing engines for many, many, many people, and being on engine designing teams, engine building teams, and I learned a lot from a lot of people, and I was able to share a lot of info with a lot of people, so I learned a lot. And when I do Tech Talk Tuesdays with you guys, which this is number 81, I think, Tech Talk Tuesday number 81, I believe that the more I teach, the more I learn, because I have to have this make sense, what I'm telling you, because I am also listening to myself, and then sometime over the next few days, I may go back and listen to the recording of what I'm doing today, and I learn by hearing my mistakes and trying to catch my mistakes. And when you guys call me out on here and say, George, did you mean to say blah, blah, blah? So, yep, I'm still learning at 71. Yeah, you're right, Jim. I'm learning at 66. But it's fun to learn. That's what makes this fun. So anyway, back to these speed limits, okay? There's not mile an hour. This is not time. These are speed limits, like valve train speed and piston speed, okay? And the reason why I picked this number, 6,000, 6,200, that's a halfway point between way too much and too slow. Now, do a passenger car. Let's do that same small block Chevy. Let's do that same small block Chevy and put it into a truck that we drive to work. We go 2,500 RPM, or maybe if you floor it and pass somebody, you might go 4,700. So let's take that same 3.5 inch stroke times, let's say you go 4,700 RPM. 3.5 stroke times 4,700 RPM. That piston speed, that average piston speed divided by 6 equals, that's only 2,700 feet per minute. Now that piston, that's a long way to go, because you only give it 3.5 inches. We only give it 3.5 inches of room, and it goes up and down so many times it covers 2,700 feet in a minute. Now, your endurance cars, and when I say an endurance car, let's go to NASCAR, Daytona 500 this weekend. Hey, this is not a political post, so we're not talking about who loves NASCAR and who doesn't, but this is facts right here. These are not opinions. These are facts. Okay, within a half inch. A pro stock motorcycle, Suzuki, runs about 2.8, 2.9 stroke now. It might be 74.3 or 73.4 millimeters, which is about 2.89 inches. That's the stroke of a Suzuki Pro Stock engine. I put down 355 for the 500 cubic inch Pro Stockers. This is a Zook. This is a 499, which I'm going to let you remember. That's the Pro Stock car limit now. And 499.9, I think they give them. And then this is the Pro Stock 160. They have a 3.87 stroke, somewhere around 3.8 to 3.85, 3.87. But I'm going to tell you how all these are different. And then this one, I believe, is a cup car. Now, you guys that are in the know and are in the engine building business know that this might be 3.1 something, 3.2 something. But this is what's left after they put the biggest bore they can. This engine, the biggest bore they can fit, given the rule of bore spacing. NASCAR and Pro Stock car have a bore spacing rule. That means this. This is the block. And the bore spacing on a Pro Stock car is from here to here, and it is 4.900. That's the biggest. They cannot move these bores. They can only be 4.900 apart. Now, if somebody sees me put something wrong or I'm goofing up or something, and I want you to know, you guys that are Harley fans, Chevrolet, Ford, Chrysler fans, Suzuki fans, this covers Suzuki's, Kawasaki's, Pro Stock cars, Pro Stock V-twins, and Cup. Most road race cars. And the thing that's unique about all of this is how they get to these strokes. The stroke, in my opinion, is what's left after you do the bore. Now, if I was a Pro Stock car racer, I would bore this block all the way out on every cylinder until there was hardly any room left here. And I'm not going to say I invented that, because that's what they do. They want the cylinders to stay round at 10,500 RPM, and they want the cylinders to stay straight at 10,500 RPM, because NHRA has a limit on RPM. So they have this box that goes in the car, and it's interchangeable. They download them. They give them a new box. They make sure they're on it. But they have an NHRA RPM limit of 10,500 RPM. And before that became fuel injected and it was carbureted, they could run at any RPM they wanted. So the big bore, short stroke, ended up being piston speed limitations and valve train limitations because they were running these things up to 11,500. And there's rumors of people going higher than that until they came up with the new EFI rules and this new imposed rev limiter deal a few years ago. And I don't know that year off the top of my head, but this is all relative to what we're talking about today with valve train speed and piston speed limits. Again, these are my opinions based on the things that I think I have learned over the years. So if you quote me on this, it's not like your buddy was wrong because he knows something I don't, or he knows something I think I do, or I think I don't, because this is only what I think. And you're tuned in, so let's see if we can make sure I say it right based on what I think I know. All right. So I would bore this block out as big as it would go without interfering with the ring seal. And that would be the limit of this unit. The stroke would be irrelevant to me because the stroke is merely what's left after we do. Let's move this over so you can see me better. If I was to build a pro stock car, I would put a 4.750 bore and try it, because I think there might be people running that, and this is from me speaking out of school or out of turn, but a 4.75 bore with a 4.900 bore spacing means that they don't have much room between these bores right here. That means that's like 150 thou between them. What is that? What is the math? I'm sorry, when I start talking live like this, I get confused. Let's do 4.900 minus the bore of 4.750 equals, yeah, it's 150 thou. So that means a 0.75 wall on all the way around based on the bore spacing limitations. So if I built a pro stock car with a 4.750 bore, my stroke would be whatever the math is left to get 499. Might be 3.5, might be 3.51, might be 3.52, but that is what's left, because I wouldn't do stroke first and then figure out the bore. I would do bore first, and let me tell you why. This is George's opinion. I would do bore first because bore tells you how big the valves can be. If your bore is this big, your valves can be this big. If your bore is this big, then your valves can be this big. And all our Harley friends, twin cam friends, all you guys out there, please understand that those big valve B2 heads that we all love, that we've been trying to get out of S&S, and there's some guys that watch this show says they have them when you want them. I don't. I put them on order for a long time. They quit making them back in the summer at S&S. They say they're making some more. I put them on order for a long time, but that's another story, and it's almost political. I don't know who gets them and who doesn't, but I have a really hard time getting B2 heads. But the difference, the B2 head only fits, it fits on lots of sizes, but the minimum bore size is 4.125. And the reason that is because of how big the valves are. So it has to have a minimum bore of 4.125. So you guys that have the little engines, the 113s and the 107s and the 103 twin cams and stuff, the B2s don't fit because the valves are bigger than the bore. So the valves will hit the cylinder. Now, back to the piston speed before we run out of time. Let's just say that if we did a pro stock car engine, and I'm going to do some backwards math here. I'm going to say that I want a 4.75 bore, and it's times 4.75 times 3.52, just guessing, times 7,854 times 8 cylinders equals. That's a 499.0. So I'm going to say that a pro stock car, my pro stock car would be with a 4.750 bore, would have a 3.52 stroke. I know that light, it's got a glare on it. 3.52. So let's figure the piston speed on that. They've got an RPM limit in the rules of 10,500. Here's how you do this math. 3.52 stroke times 10,500 RPM limit divided by 6 equals 6,160 feet. And my limit, my personal limit, is somewhere around 6,200. So at the rev limiter imposed by NHRA with a 3.52 stroke with a 4.75 bore equals a 499, 500 cubic inch pro stock, or your piston speed at the rev limiter would be 61,600. So that's almost there. Now, that's not good for endurance. Endurance is like, and when I say endurance, cup. Let's say cup is 3.25, and this is just a guess, times the NASCAR limitation, I'm going to guess at 9,200, divided by 6 equals. That's 4,980 feet. So that means that this thing, and when you see, let's see, let's say you got the guy in the 4-car there that runs the Roush engine. Kevin Harvick's 45 years old. He's going to run good. Ran really good. He has to run that engine, I think, for 2 races now. I think they have to have them sealed, and they have to be able to run them at 2 races. So they are really careful with this 49,800 deal. They want the piston speed to stay down within these limits. So they probably have a company regulation or something somewhere where they don't want that thing to exceed 5,000 for a long, long time. Because let me tell you about, when you go 500 miles wide open at full throttle for 500 miles, that's a long, long time at wide open. When your race engine, your hot rod Harley, whatever, you don't hold your engine wide open at maximum RPM like they do when they go there for 500 miles. Now, this is just me generalizing some stuff. Let's go over here to the Pro Stock 160 that Matt Smith runs, and maybe the Harley team, and Ryan Ayler, and some of my buddies that have those big 160s. On ours, when we went fast, we were going 670s, 195 to 198 miles an hour most of the time. The last year we ran in 2016, we were running a 5.14 bore. Yes. When you have a 5.1 bore, you can run a 2.7 intake valve and a 2-inch exhaust valve, or a 2.75 intake valve and a 2.100 exhaust valve. We had a really big piston. So what S&S did when they designed this engine was they said, we want the biggest bore we can get. The cubic inch limit is 160 by NHRA. Everybody with me? 160 cubic inches is the limit for that Pro Stock PS 160. So at that limit, let's just do the 5.14. 5.14 bore times 5.14 bore times 3.87, guessing on stroke, times 7,854 times 2 cylinders equals 160.6. Okay, so you'd have to take a little bit of stroke away or a little bit of bore to get that thing back under that 160. If you tech guys from NHRA are watching, here's some of the things to measure up on, right? 5.14 times 5.14 times 3.84. I don't know if that's good. Times 7,854 times 2 cylinders equals. That's a 159.3. So yes, that would be a 3.8. Let's say a 3.85 bore. Stroke. Now that engine runs good to 10,000 RPM. It runs really, really good to 10,000. Might make peak power at 9,500, 9,600, but you can, like Ryan Ayler and Matt and those guys, they can go down the track and go over 10,000 in first and second gear. Back in 16, we were going over 10,000 in the first few gears, and we'd gear the bike to go 10,000 across the finish line. So with that math on piston speed coming into play, we would go, let's say, 3.85 stroke times 10,000 RPM divided by 6 equals 6,416. So that engine, they have crankshaft troubles, they have rod troubles, they pull the rods apart, they go out of true, the crankshafts press together, and they go like this, and the unbelievable force of the 2 connecting rods on that one little pin, rod pin, and that 2 big heavy 5-inch pistons, 5.14 pistons, going 6,400 feet per minute, exceeds the speed limit. So if I was to start with a clean sheet of paper on an NHRA Pro Stock 160, I would design it with a bigger bore and a shorter stroke. I would put bigger valves in it, and I would get inside of this 6200 deal just so it would last longer. But that's not the only reason you do this, y'all. And I'm almost run out of time trying to cover this. There's another story to tell you on another day about this 2.89 Suzuki at 73.4. And I didn't even get to talk about the valve train limits. It doesn't matter what the piston speed limit is if you can't rev it up with valve springs and valve control. It doesn't matter what the piston speed is if you can't control the valve train. It doesn't matter what the valve train speed is if you can't keep the pistons in it. Now, what does this change at 6,000 and 6,200? What is affected in here? Believe it or not, it's ring seal. And I'm going to theorize here with a dyno sheet. And this is just off the top of my head. And it looks like this. Most dyno sheets do. The only thing that's different whenever a dyno sheet looks like this, the only thing that's different is down here is the RPM and the power. All dyno sheets look like this. This is RPM. And if it's a Harley or street car, it has a torque curve that looks like this. If it is a Pro Stock, it looks like this, and the torque curve's over here. That's why we don't care what the torque is on a Pro Stocker. It's over, the torque peak is over here on a racing engine, and the horsepower is over here. So let's do just the generic horsepower curve. All right, not talking about RPM here, but let's talk about piston speed. Let's say that here, that's our 6,200 feet per minute limit. 6,200, okay? 6,200. What happens when you try to ask that thing to go more than 6,200 feet in a minute? Is the rings cannot stay connected to the piston. The rings will be, the piston's here and the rings in here going like this. And at below this speed, the ring goes with the piston. They stay as one. But at some speed, the piston has to stop at the top and has to stop at the bottom. And at some speed, the piston stops and the ring keeps going. And so it gets this wear going here. Piston goes to the bottom, the ring tries to hang with it. Piston goes to the top, and the piston stops. The only reason the piston stops is because the wrist pin is holding on to the connecting rod, and the connecting rod is holding on to the crankshaft for dear life at peak piston speed. The piston's trying to come off, the wrist pin's trying to come off, and the rod's trying to come off the crank. So when the piston stops at maximum piston speed, the ring keeps going. It's inertia and momentum. So, if you guys are interested in this subject, I would be proud to go here again next time because there's still more left. I have to still talk about, you know, the rest of this story because I only got halfway there in 30 minutes. Anyway, thank you all for watching. It's really great to do Tech Talk number 81. I wanted to tell y'all, it's very scary out there with the weather. A lot of people don't have power. There's a lot of people still working on this pandemic and trying to get healed up from the virus. And we have to take care of each other. You know, I see so much political stuff and so much stuff going on. And you know what? All of us on here, all of you guys watching right now, and all the people that are reading on here, we love the same thing, man. We're trying to figure out how to go faster. We're trying to figure out how to make more horsepower. And we have a similar passion in horsepower and performance. So let's all see the unity and the brotherhood in that. And let's look out for each other. May God bless. I'll talk to you again next Tuesday. Oh, Hogs Gone Wild. Wait, Hogs Gone Wild. I'll see you one more time before Hogs Gone Wild. Silver Dollar, Georgia, at Reynolds. Roger's having to race. Says he's got 160-something motorcycle sign up for that. Fast Baggers, ET Bikes, y'all come on. Going to Georgia, Reynolds, Georgia, at Silver Dollar Motorsports Park. Amen.